This is the Registrar Podcast, the show that goes way beyond the ins and outs of consumer protection. Stay with us to meet the personal side of people who dedicate their careers to protect the public interest. Thanks for tuning in.
All right, and welcome to another episode of the Registrar Podcast. I am your host, Daniel Rukima. There's so much that goes on in the regulatory sector in the fall. A lot of conferences, boards change, just a lot that happens. And I found a few minutes to do this podcast, and I was able to find somebody and pull her out of her very, very busy schedule as well to have this conversation. A young woman who I meet at conferences all around the world. And we discussed probably 8-9 months ago that we were going to do a podcast. And, well, here we are. I have Jimi Bush with us. Jimi Bush is the Director of Quality and Engagement at the Washington State Medical Commission. Jimi.
Daniel.
Welcome. How are you?
Hi. I'm good. How you doing?
I'm really, really well. It's good to see you. Usually we see each other in person. I'm trying to think all of the different places: Denver, Colorado, Savannah, Georgia, Dublin, Ireland, earlier this year, and also Salt Lake City, Utah. Before we get into our awesome conversation, let me tell people why I wanted to have you on the show. And the way I do that is by reading your biography, because it's pretty extraordinary. So just hang on for 1 second while I get through this amazing bit of information. Jimi Bush started with the WMC as Performance and Outreach Manager in January 2015. Today, she leads the Quality and Engagement team, which evaluates and modernizes processes and procedures through Six Sigma lean tools, paperless workflows, and employee training. She is responsible for developing, tracking, and holding business units accountable for their quantitative and qualitative performance. Jimi plays a major role in the outward-facing communication for the Medical Commission. She has developed communication strategies for Twitter and Facebook that center around providing unique content for the distinctive demographics of each platform. It's important. I'm going to get to that in a little bit. She and the communications team strive to execute social media posts, website updates, and email distributions in a timely manner and eye-catching approaches. Jimi has been the driving force behind the Medical Commission's annual conference and Speakers Bureau. By reaching out to stakeholders and channeling new speaking topics, Jimi has increased the attendance to the annual conference by 50% and number of speaking engagements by 140%. She also has 2 papers published in the Journal of Medical Regulation, JMR, highlighting the accomplishments of the WMC. Jimi studied economics and mathematics at NYU and continued onto Arizona State University, where she received her master's in public administration. Smarty pants.
You've never been to ASU?
Actually, I have. I was referring to NYU.
Oh, okay. Sure. Yeah. Go Violets.
So, exactly. So, tell me a little bit. Let's our watchers and our listeners learn a little bit more about you. I mean, I just read your bio and it's tremendous. In your own words, what is it that you do in the licensing sector in Washington?
I don't actually license anyone. I am not boots on the ground. Mm-hmm. But my job is to make your life easier, is what I always try and say. I am, at its most core, support staff. If you need something, I hate slapping a Band-Aid on something and working around a problem. Let's work together. Let's fix it. Let's cut down licensing time. Let's fix whatever ails you. And so in just general, in licensing, I want our licenses to go out as soon as possible. And so talk to me about your pain points and how we can fix them. That's what I do on a daily basis.
Bit of a management consulting side of things.
I'm like a plumber, but, for technological problems.
Technological plumber. So you have a degree in mathematics and you have a background in economics. It's a very, very applied science. What got you, I've had this conversation before with you, what got you into math?
the short story is I wanted to be an astronaut, and my dad sat me down and said, you can be anything you want to be. And I said, I want to be an astronaut, but I have a disability. And so he said, accept that. So I went into math just in this idea of if I can't go to the stars, I want to get as close as I can to getting there. I made some other choices. I wanted to study abroad. There are so many brilliant people in this world, and NASA only accepts 4 of them every year. So I decided to do something that made me a little more happy in terms of econ versus math. But yeah, I went into math because I wanted to be an astronaut.
And have your astronaut dreams helped you where you are today?
I would say, the whole idea of this whole shooting for the stars idea is what I think gets you to a place where you do the best you can. Mm-hmm. Nothing in this world, you're never going to actually get what you want in this world, but you work hard, you be kind, and amazing things are going to happen to you. So as, lofty as my astronaut goals were or are, they do teach, it brings on valuable skills. It teaches you how to do new things and just not to be afraid of failing.
Very, very interesting. I want to ask you something, Jimmy. I've heard you've been involved, and I just want to kind of understand a little bit more. What is medical recidivism?
So medical recidivism is not a technical term. We just talk in terms of medical recidivism. We talk about it because we are the medical commission. So we are the term that we've kind of coined is just when a medical provider, specifically a physician assistant, and whether that's an osteopathic physician or an allopathic physician, they get in trouble for something. And the recidivism is not that they might get in trouble again, but they're getting in trouble again for the same thing. It's a way that we kind of measure our effectiveness as a regulatory board, in just kind of saying, people make mistakes, things happen, but are you making the same mistake over again? Because then are we being effective in our job if you keep making the same mistake?
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So perhaps before I jumped into that, I should have asked you to tell me a little bit about the Washington State Medical Commission. And the reason being is most of the people who listen or watch this podcast are still Canadians. We're working on building that to Americans and others, but still very Canadian. And we have a very different approach to regulation. As you know, most of them are they're all actually, or the vast majority in licensing and professional regulation are nonprofit organizations, versus in the U.S. they are run by state governments. Tell me what the Washington State Medical Commission does and who exactly they regulate.
So for my Canadian friends, you guys have a much better educational system than the U.S. does. But if you don't know, Washington State is right below British Columbia. We're not Washington, D.C., which is on the east coast of the country and our capital. But we're, I can be in Vancouver in a couple hours. So we're right below British Columbia. We regulate as a state board. We vet medical providers, so allopathic and physician assistants. We vet their license, and hopefully that's the last time you'll ever hear from me. But if something comes up, anyone across the country can file a complaint with us if against a physician who holds a license in Washington State. So once that happens, we just investigate it, take action if necessary, and then look at what we call compliance. So any kind of remediation, education, whatever might happen to kind of get that provider back on track. We are state run. We're not federally run. So we are fully funded by licensee fees. So when you renew your license, when you get your initial license, we don't take any money out of the actual general fund, and we don't receive any federal money. We are supported by the licensees themselves.
So that part is the same as the regulators in Canada, although of course they're regulated provincially and by territory. So a bunch of years ago, I think it was in Colorado, I can't remember. You and I were in a panel together. That's when we met.
It was the first time I had done something in official capacity for Clear. I moderated a talk where you gave me one of the greatest books ever that kind of launched my social media career. You had this Masters of Disaster book.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And I moderated that talk.
Got it. Yes. Now I remember. I had a really bad headache then because that was in Colorado and I had altitude sickness and my head was just pounding and I couldn't figure it out. And people, and I was just popping pills and all this other stuff. And somebody once one person came to me and said, I think you have altitude sickness. And I had no idea what that meant until I realized I was in Colorado. So that whole presentation is a little bit cloudy, but I do remember Masters of Disasters, and I still have that book.
And it was super early in the morning. Like, it was the first talk of the day at like 8 o'clock. But like 100 people showed up to hear your talk. And so that was my first official capacity.
And look where you've gone since. Look at where you've gone since. I mean, holy cow. I have to admit, I mean, we were in Dublin, and I would say without a doubt that the people that I spoke to at that conference, which was the International Congress for Clear, back in early May, the presentation that I heard most people speak about afterwards was the one that you did on diversity, equity, and inclusion. You were talking to Stacey. You were presenting with Stacey.
And let's give credit where credit is due. Stacey is an amazing speaker.
100%.
She is incredibly passionate about what she does. She's incredibly knowledgeable. And she speaks to you like she'll speak in a room of 200 people, but you feel like she's talking to you directly.
Yes.
So as much as I would love to take credit for everyone wanting to talk about the talk, Stacey is an amazing presenter and a wonderful person to work with.
In my world, Stacey is the godmother of DEI. She really is. She's my influencer. She really is my role model, and I agree wholeheartedly. When Stacey speaks, you listen. The presentation between the two of you was exceptional, and I just wanted to know what got you interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And especially as it pertains to communications, which is certainly my real interest as well, and it's understanding different audiences, how to communicate with them so that they can get the right message in the most equitable way. What drove you into that?
I don't know that it was a choice that I just woke up one day and said, this is what I'm going to do this week. It's been a little bit of a lifelong build, per se. Like I said earlier, I wanted to be an astronaut, couldn't do it because I had a disability. But until that moment in my life, I never knew I had one because my parents, people around me treated me like I didn't have one. Mm-hmm. But I know that kind of treatment so I'm deaf, so you can't see that. And that's not true for people who have skin color that might be a little bit darker than cream. And my grandparents, my ancestral home is Georgia. And my grandparents had to go to Florida to get married because they were an interracial couple. And just kind of the fallout over like being born to a grandfather who was a Native American whose wife had to ride in the back seat of his car because in Georgia he had to be her quote unquote driver. Having a German Jew as a mother, these kind of just little things eat away at self-esteem, and they're not anything as traumatizing as people of African descent or even our Japanese, in case anyone doesn't know, during World War II, we put Japanese people in basically camps because we thought they were a threat. So there are all these, and it's nothing I've ever gone through is as traumatizing as that, but it's almost like just that constant reminder from my grandparents, my ancestors, where it's like we came from a place of hardship, and be lucky for who you are today. And so, like I said, I don't think DEI, I just woke up one day and said, this is what I'm going to do. I just feel incredibly lucky to have a somewhat diverse background and go out there and tell people, like, it might, you're always going to have that little piece in the back of your head that says, maybe you can't do this, maybe you can't, but you can, you always can. So like I said, I don't know that I woke up and did it. I wanted to make my grandparents proud, our German heritage, our Native American heritage, Jim Crow laws. I didn't want that to perpetuate any further. I want the next generation to wake up every day and say, I am wonderful, I am good, and I can make a difference.
Yeah, that's deep. That's quite the background, Jimmy. I had no idea that you were living with a disability, nor that your grandparents had the diverse background that you mentioned. It really does position you as a very credible ally when you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. What strategies in communications are optimal when it comes to speaking to different audiences, in your opinion, and why is it important to be clear in your communications where misinformation and trolling is involved?
Oh, those are very separate questions. So let me start just in terms of how you communicate with people. I believe that you have to have a communication strategy that speaks to the people you are speaking to. So in Washington, we have a large population of people of African descent, Korean as a first language speakers, and Spanish as first language speakers. Those are quote unquote minorities, even though they make up more than half of the state. Now, you cannot tailor a conversation in the same way that you would someone whose first language is Spanish, who lives on the other side of the mountains, which tends to be more of a conservative part of the state, versus the western side of the mountains to someone who speaks Korean. These are very different things. So you have to tailor that message to what you're trying to tell them. I think the idea of a COVID vaccine is probably the best idea, the best example I can give you, just because that was one message we were giving to everyone. Everyone needed to go get the vaccine. And so, but how do we tailor this message to meet certain demographics? Our Spanish speakers tend to be undocumented people, and so they don't like presenting themselves to authority, whether it's law enforcement or a physician. They think that a physician has a duty to report them. So we went on a mission to begin with, just in terms of there's such a thing as patient-doctor confidentiality. Your doctor is not going to turn you in to ICE. Like, just go get the vaccine, take care of your health, and let's talk about everything else another day. But let's get that vaccine first. For our Korean-speaking brethren, a lot of them are, the demographic is technically women over the age of 55. So they would want to bring their children or someone with them to help interpret and talk about what's going on in their life. And we need to make sure whatever we're doing is comfortable. So how you talk to someone needs to be based on who they are, their demographic, and what they care about. The other aspect, especially with the east side of the mountains, is teenage smoking rates are going through the roof. I cannot sit there and go, hey, you, stop smoking. Nobody listens to me. No, what we did was kind of have a community ambassador program. We found other teenagers that lived in that community that cared about their peers quitting smoking or not starting smoking, we gave them the education and the tools and the resources to go back to their community and then talk to their peers on a one-on-one, like seriously stop smoking, vaping, whatever it might be. So there's no one good strategy that works for anything. You have to know who you're talking to, what they react to, and make sure that message hits home, like hits them right in that heartbeat. Okay, so that was the first bit of your question in terms of how do you talk to someone. What was the second part?
So why is it important, and I'm glad you kind of set that stage, why is it important to be clear in your communication where misinformation and trolling presence is involved?
I don't think you're ever going to get rid of trolls. The statistics in the U.S. is around COVID, it was something along the lines of 60-ish% of the misinformation that was spewed on social media were created by 11 people. And it's just these 11 people that have a following, and then someone else picks up on it and keeps retweeting and keeps giving it credibility. So you can't stop that. If we're talking about a world that's connected by the internet, you're never going to be able to stop misinformation. You have to approach it in terms of being calm, being collected, and sitting there going, this just isn't true. Don't feed the beast. Now, there are some professions that maybe you can feed the beast. But as a medical professional, we could not troll back, as I say. If you've ever looked at Wendy's Twitter, and if you haven't, it's like my favorite thing. But we are regulatory bodies. We need to be the authority. We need to be calm, collected. And you're never going to kill a story, but you can stop feeding it.
Mm-hmm. Certainly is, we have our fair share of misinformation and disinformation here in Canada, and directly links, of course, to politics, which we're not going to get into. But from a regulation side, how is this going to be? How do you deal with that, and what does the future look like in terms of protecting the public when a lot of the work that you do is directly opposed by people who just simply disagree and feel that their platform and their anti what would it be? Just that their message is what should prevail over yours.
I believe everyone has the right to say what they want as long as it doesn't hurt someone else. Mm-hmm. And regulating medical professionals is a particular issue because you have an authority. There's an imbalance of power. So not even misinformation, but let's just say a boundaries violation or sexual misconduct, if we want to go that way. We've had to retrain our investigators to believe the victim or the survivor first, because we just believe doctors. Why would a doctor ever do that? They took an oath. They're not going to hurt anyone. They're not, like, why would they do something? You see a pattern in one of my papers in the recidivism. You see a pattern, especially among psychiatrists, that kind of use your vulnerabilities against you. You are responsible as an authority for what you say and how you present that information. And I don't think you can stop it. You can't stop it. You're never going to 100% find everyone. But I think our job is to do the best we can and find these people who are predatory, who are looking for attention or preying on the vulnerable. And it's our job to intervene in those more serious moments and say, stop.
Do you feel
it's your choice if you believe me, I guess, but like in a social media kind of way. But I honestly think social media is starting to fade out. I think what you're doing with this podcast, having more of a one-on-one candid conversation, is a much more effective medium than Twitter is. It's run by a little bit of a loose cannon right now. And so the credibility of what's being published, the rise of AI and just tweets being posted by a computer, I think people are starting to lose faith in the genuine nature of social media.
It's a very interesting perspective. You're right. Things change, things evolve so incredibly quickly. And take it back to what I was saying. I don't want to get into politics, but you see the foreign interference in elections. A lot of that is generated, or most of it is generated through AI now, and social media.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please.
So how much in the provinces is TikTok allowed? Is that province by province? Is that profession by profession?
In
How
Canada,
are you guys dealing with TikTok?
TikTok is completely available to the public, but I believe, now don't quote me on this, I believe that TikTok's use is banned on federal government electronics. That's what I believe.
Yep.
I'm not sure about the provinces.
Same thing with us. We can't use a government. And so as part of that, we cannot, like the Washington Medical Commission cannot have a TikTok account. So I was just wondering how you guys were kind of handling that.
Well, this whole issue of misinformation and disinformation is I was going to say is viral. It's a cancer. It really is. And at a time when the world is really trying to recalibrate from the impacts of COVID, it's just ripe. It's just open season for this disinformation. You've got governments that have led through COVID and are really trying to get the countries back on track. And then you have people who are just power-hungry mongrels who will say and do anything and will lie about anything just so that they can get that vote. And they just, when I understand it kind of that, if you're suffering because you've lost a job, you can't afford groceries, you can't pay rent. And you look at a politician and you say, well, it's easy to say it's his fault, especially when somebody else says it is his fault because A, B, C. So I get it. When you're suffering, it's very easy to blame other people. And that's where this cancer that I call is coming from. How to deal with it, I don't know. I really don't know. But this is something that I hope there will be strategies in the future to allow people to discover the truth. I know that, and I'm a social scientist, so I know that, there's of course varying degrees to truths, but I hope it becomes a little bit more mathematical, so a little bit more like your world. Either 1 + 1 = 2 or 1 + 1 = 3, right? And if it's 3, then it's wrong and no discussion.
Well, so think about it. So in one of those, I am a quantitative person. I like things fitting in my little box, and there's always an explanation for it. I had a mathematics professor in one of those 1 + 1 = 2, 1 + 1 does not equal 3. Well, if we're talking about base 10, if we're using a different mathematic code, so if you're using the binary system, 0 + 1 + 1 is 11 in a computer mathematic language. So even in the most hard of sciences, we have to get on the same page about what we're talking about. Are we talking about mathematics in base 10, or are we talking about a different mathematical language? But as long as we're on the same page and we can have a discourse coming kind of from the same facts, I guess, in one of those, can we just agree on a certain amount of things and move forward? We might disagree, but let's get the core of what we're talking about straight, because I feel like that starts a lot of miscommunication if everyone doesn't kind of start from the same understanding of what we're talking about.
That's Jimi Bush. You heard it right here. So listen, we've interviewed a few people on the show who are retiring, and I asked them about their legacies that they were most proud of. So I know you're not retiring anytime soon. So looking ahead to tomorrow, what do you, as the future of the sector, and thinking about what it is that we just spoke about, What do you hope you'll be able to reflect back on when it's your time to retire and say that was a good thing?
I hope that when I retire, my legacy is creating a culture where people can admit they're wrong. So that's a very high level way of saying it. But creating a culture where people can talk about maybe things they don't understand. I think there's too much in social media, there's too much with just 24-hour everything where you have an idea in your head and then you just hold it. You can't listen to someone else's point of view. You can't listen to someone else's story, how maybe your words have impacted them or their life, or just you have a narrative in your head and you stick with it. I think that's so common in our culture these days. And I would love to leave behind a legacy where we talk about issues and it's okay to change your mind and it's okay to kind of go, you know what, I was wrong. And now that I've heard your perspective, I'm going to move my life and I'm going to wake up tomorrow and walk a different walk. So I think I would like to leave behind a legacy where asking why, asking how is accepted and embraced.
That's amazing. Well, thank you very much. We have one small piece that we have to do that we do with all of our guests. It's our firing line series. So I'm just going to ask you a bunch of very random questions that we haven't discussed before. And it allows people to get to know the personal Jimi, not so much the professional, which we've been honored to have you here and discuss on the show. So my producer, Jamie, is sitting right over there, and he is going to hand me this first card on these beautiful Registrar podcast cards.
Ooh, fancy.
Right? Thank you very much. Best part of your job? I said it was personal, but I guess it's not. Best part of your job?
The day-to-day nature of just not knowing what's going to happen. I lovingly refer to my department as the land of misfit toys because I have mathematicians, data analysts, and then social media communication people. So you never know what's going to happen that day. And, lovingly, I love my misfit toys.
Amazing. Sushi or chicken and waffles?
I'm going to go chicken and waffles.
Really?
I could condition. You want me? I can condition this in terms of
absolutely.
If I know where the sushi's coming from and I know what's happening with it, then I'm all about the sushi. But even the worst chicken and waffles are delicious.
Really?
Yeah.
I was so close to saying I really connect with you, and I feel like it's because you've got like these Canadian vibes going on, and you're like one of us. But with this chicken and waffle thing, no, not all. That's we are not chicken and waffle people.
Well, then you haven't had it right.
I have not had it right. I guess not.
You got to get the hot honey butter, so it has a little bit of a kick to it. And your chicken can't have bones in it. Like you need that breast meat, right? So that you can just make the nice slice right with your hot honey butter and slice right through. I mean, if I'm in Japan, I'm absolutely eating sushi 3 times a day all the time. But if I'm in Tucson, I'm going to eat chicken and waffles.
So if we have an international conference where you and I bump into each other and say it's in Japan, we're not going for chicken and waffles.
We are not going for chicken and waffles. We're not. I mean, I won't I love noodles in this, but no, I will eat sushi all day, every day, 3 times a day in Japan. Okay.
You have an assignment to teach me what good chicken and waffles are. So I'm gonna wait for that next time I see you. All right. Recommend the next conference. Where would you like the next conference to be?
Well, now it's got to be Japan. Let's go to Tokyo.
I'm good with that. So Adam Parfit, if you're listening, Stacey Mason, you are the president-elect of Clear. You've got 2 votes for Tokyo, so we cannot have chicken and waffles. We bumped into each other at the Clear conference in Dublin. What was the best part of that trip for you?
Working with Stacy was one of the highlights I think is going to be of my career, just in terms of she's so easy to work with and being a presenter, but also any doubt I had about myself. I was one of the few people from the United States at that conference. And I felt a little self-conscious, and just in terms of, I'm going to use like an American football reference. Is that going to land? Is that joke going to carry with this crowd? And so one of the highlights was working with her and just one of those quieting that doubt, quieting that, like, she's like, if you think it's funny, they're going to think it's funny. So that was one of the big highlights. I also had a properly poured Guinness, and so that was nice too.
Did you go to the actual Guinness brewery, or was it at
I did.
Temple?
I did do the touristy thing and went to the brew house.
Nice. That's one thing I missed, and I wish I hadn't. Jimmy,
it was fun.
This was amazing. This is what I'd expected. I'm so glad that we got to connect, and I think we should co-host the Registrar podcast. I think that would be really cool. So if any of our viewers, any of our listeners think that Jimmy should become a co-host on the podcast, please contact me and let me know, because it might just help convince her a little bit that she would be amazing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking time to hang out, and I will see you somewhere in the world sometime soon.
You're so kind, Daniel. Thank you.
You're very welcome. If you are listening to us from your favorite podcast platform, don't forget to subscribe, and please give us that 5-star rating. If you're connecting to us from YouTube, don't forget to smash that like button so you can tell other people how awesome we are. And also, please, if you'd like to see a little bit more about the Registrar, you can also go to theregistrar.ca. We produce a quarterly digital magazine, and there's all kinds of story about the Canadian regulatory sector and also regulatory organizations from around the world. Thank you.